During the pre-show meet and greet, when Steve approached the Morales family, he immediately sensed something different about Elena. While other families chatted excitedly about being on television, Elena was reserved, polite, but clearly nervous, in a way that went beyond typical stage fright. "Mrs. Morales," Steve had said, noting the respect in Elena's posture, the way she stood when he approached. "Are you excited to be here today?" "Yes, Mr. Harvey," Elena had replied, her English careful but clear. "Thank you for this opportunity. My children, they are very happy." Steve had noticed how Elena deflected attention from herself to her children, how she spoke about their happiness rather than her own. There was something in her manner that suggested this woman was accustomed to making herself secondary, to finding joy only in her children's experiences. The Morales family had been selected to compete against the Chen family from California, and from the moment the games started, it was clear that this was about more than typical Family Feud competition. Sophia, Miguel and Isabella played with the enthusiasm of children who had grown up watching American television, who understood pop culture references and survey responses with the fluency of natives. Elena, for her part, participated when called upon, but always deferred to her children when possible. Steve noticed how she would lean in to listen when her children explained their answer choices, how she beamed with pride at their quick thinking and perfect English, how she seemed to find more joy in their success than in her own participation. The game progressed through 3 rounds, with the Morales family performing exceptionally well. Steve was impressed by the children's intelligence and poise, but he found himself increasingly curious about Elena, whose careful responses and deferential manner suggested someone who had learned to navigate the world with extreme caution. It was during the 4th round that everything changed. The survey question seemed innocent enough. "Name something that makes people feel like they belong." Sophia had given a strong answer. "Being accepted by your community." The response earned 28 points and sent the family into celebration mode. But as the applause died down, Steve decided to engage more personally with the family. "That's a great answer, Sophia," Steve said. "Community acceptance is so important. Mrs. Morales, what makes you feel like you belong here in America?" The question was meant to be inclusive, celebrating the kind of interaction that made Family Feud feel warm and welcoming. But when Elena looked up at Steve, her expression wasn't that of someone preparing to share a heartwarming story about finding home in America. "Mr. Harvey," she said, her voice clear but carrying a tremor that made the studio begin to quiet. "May I tell you the truth?" Steve nodded, sensing that whatever Elena wanted to share was important. "I do not feel like I belong here," Elena said, her careful English making each word carry extra weight. "My children are Americans, but I am not here. I have lived in Georgia for 15 years. I work 2 jobs. I pay taxes. I send my children to school, but I am not supposed to be here." The studio began to fall silent as people sensed that something significant was happening. Elena continued, her voice growing stronger but also more vulnerable. "Every day I wake up afraid that today will be the day they take me away from my babies. Every time there is a knock on the door, every time I see a police car, every time my children are late coming home from school, I think maybe this is the end. Maybe today I lose everything I have built for 15 years. Steve felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that this conversation had moved far beyond entertainment into territory that demanded his full attention and compassion. "Elena," Steve said, his voice gentler now, "tell me about your children. They're American citizens?" "Yes," Elena replied, her pride evident despite her fear. "Sophia, she will graduate high school next year. She wants to study nursing. Miguel, he plays soccer for his school team. Isabella, she loves mathematics. They are good children. They are American children, but they live with the fear that their mother will disappear." Elena paused, looking at her 3 children who were now listening intently, understanding that their mother was sharing truths they had all lived with, but rarely spoken aloud. "I came here 15 years ago because bad men killed my husband in Mexico. I was pregnant with Sophia, and I knew if I stayed, they would kill us both. I did not come here for money or for benefits. I came here to save my baby's life." The audience was completely silent now. drawn into Elena's story, not by entertainment value, but by the raw honesty of someone speaking truths that millions of families live with every day. I know I broke the law when I came here, Elena continued. But my baby, she did not break any law. She was born here. This is her country. Miguel and Isabella, they were born here too. They say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning. They sing the national anthem. They are Americans in their hearts and in their birth certificates. Steve looked at Sophia, Miguel, and Isabella, 3 young people who had been living with the constant fear that their family could be destroyed at any moment, not by violence or disease or accident, but by immigration policies that treated their mother's presence as a crime rather than recognizing her as the backbone of an American family. Elena, Steve said, walking away from his podium and approaching the family, what do you want people to understand about your situation? Elena's composure finally cracked slightly, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. I want people to understand that I am not a bad person. I work hard. I pay taxes. I volunteer at my children's school when I can. I have never been arrested, never been in trouble. I just want to live with my children without being afraid every day. She looked directly at Steve, then at the cameras. I want people to understand that when you separate families like mine, you are not just hurting me. You are hurting American children. You are hurting Sophia, who has nightmares about coming home and finding me gone. You are hurting Miguel, who sometimes doesn't want to go to soccer practice because he's afraid something will happen while he's away. You are hurting Isabella, who asks me every night if I will still be here when she wakes up. Steve Harvey, who had hosted thousands of hours of television, who had heard every conceivable story the human heart could tell, found himself facing something that broke every rule of game show hosting. This wasn't about Family Feud anymore. This was about a family living in the shadow of policies that treated love and protection of children as secondary to enforcement of borders. Steve turned to address the entire studio, his voice carrying an authority that transcended entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, Elena Morales just shared something with us that takes incredible courage. She's lived in this country for 15 years, raised 3 American children, contributed to her community, and done it all, while living with a fear that most of us can't imagine. He turned back to Elena, his expression showing the profound respect he felt for her situation. Elena, I want you to know something. You may not have papers that say you belong here, but you have something more important than that. You have children who are American citizens. You have a community that depends on your work. And you have a story that reminds us that this country was built by people who came here seeking safety and opportunity for their children. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his personal business card. This has my phone number on it, he said, handing it to Elena. Not my agents, not my managers, mine. And I want you to know that if anyone ever tries to separate you from your American children, you call me, because what you've built here, what you've created with these beautiful kids, that's as American as anything I've ever seen. But Steve wasn't finished. He addressed the cameras directly. I want everyone watching this to understand something, he said. This family represents thousands of families across America, parents who came here out of desperation, who have built lives, raised American children, contributed to communities, but who live every day with the fear that their families could be destroyed. He gestured to Sophia, Miguel, and Isabella. These children are Americans. They're honor students, athletes, volunteers. They're exactly the kind of young people we should be proud to call our own. And their mother, Elena, she's the kind of person who makes America stronger. Steve turned back to Elena, his voice thick with emotion. Elena, you asked what makes people feel like they belong. Let me tell you what I see when I look at your family. I see belonging. I see people who have made this country their home, who have contributed to their community, who have raised children who embody the best of American values. He paused, looking around the studio. You belong here, Elena, not because of papers or policies, but because of love, because of the life you've built, the children you've raised, the community you've served. You belong here because this is where your family is, and family is what makes America home. The audience erupted in applause. But it wasn't the typical game show cheering. It was the kind of emotional response that comes from witnessing something that challenges assumptions, that forces people to see complex issues in human terms, rather than political abstractions. Elena, overwhelmed by the support and acceptance she had never dared to hope for, broke down completely. Sophia, Miguel, and Isabella immediately surrounded their mother, offering comfort and protection in the way that children do when they understand their parent needs them to be strong. The episode that aired 6 weeks later became one of the most watched and most discussed in Family Feud history. Not because of the game, but because viewers witnessed something powerful: a family's courage in sharing their truth, and a host's compassion in creating space for that truth to be heard. But the real story happened after the cameras stopped rolling. True to his word, Steve connected Elena with immigration attorneys who specialized in cases like hers. Through their guidance, Elena was able to apply for a U visa, available to victims of serious crimes who have suffered mental or physical abuse, and are helpful to law enforcement in the investigation or prosecution of criminal activity. Elena's case was complicated, but not hopeless. Her husband's murder in Mexico, her cooperation with authorities there, her 15-year history of positive community involvement, created a pathway to legal status that she had never known existed. The process took 18 months, during which Steve's foundation provided financial support for legal fees and helped ensure that Elena could continue working legally while her case was pending. Throughout this period, Steve maintained regular contact with the family, checking on their progress and providing encouragement during the most difficult moments. On March 15th, 2 years after that Family Feud taping, Elena Morales received her green card. The ceremony was small: just Elena, her 3 children, their attorney, and Steve Harvey, who had become not just an advocate, but genuine family friend. "Today, you are officially recognized for what you have always been," Steve said at the small celebration afterward. "You are home, you belong here, and your children will never again have to fear that their mother might disappear." Elena, now able to speak without fear, had grown more confident in her English and more vocal about her experience. She began speaking at community events about immigration issues, always emphasizing that behind every pussy debate are real families, real children, real people whose lives hang in the balance. Sophia graduated high school as valedictorian and is now studying nursing at Georgia State University, planning to work with immigrant communities who face healthcare access challenges. Miguel earned a soccer scholarship to a Division II college and dreams of coaching youth sports in underserved communities. Isabella, now in middle school, excels in mathematics and wants to become an immigration attorney. The Steve Harvey Foundation established the Elena Morales Family Unity Fund, providing legal assistance to mixed-status families facing separation. The fund has helped keep hundreds of families together, always emphasizing that protecting children should transcend political considerations. Elena still works at the nursing home, but now as a certified nursing assistant with proper documentation and full benefits. She has moved her family to a larger apartment and brought her elderly mother from Mexico to live with them legally. For the first time in 16 years, Elena sleeps peacefully, no longer waking up afraid that today might be the day she loses everything. Steve Harvey learned something that day that changed how he approaches every show, every interaction, every moment he spends in the public eye. He learned that courage comes in many forms, that belonging is about more than legal status, and that sometimes the most important stories are the ones people are afraid to tell. Elena's story became more than just a television moment. It became a reminder that behind every immigration statistic is a human being, behind every policy debate is a family, and behind every fear of deportation are children who just want to know their parent will be there when they come home from school. Because sometimes a mother's quiet confession of fear can teach an entire studio about the meaning of home. Sometimes courage looks like admitting you're afraid. And sometimes the most powerful television happens when someone decides that human dignity matters more than any political position, any rating consideration, any show business protocol. Elena's truth, that her children are Americans, but she lives as if she doesn't belong, became a rallying cry for immigration reform that recognizes the humanity in complex situations. And Steve Harvey proved that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply saying, "You belong here." "This is your home, and I will help you fight to keep your family together." The words fell from Elena Morales' lips, like stones dropping into still water, creating ripples that spread across the Family Feud studio, until every person present felt the weight of what she had just revealed. Steve Harvey stood motionless at his podium, staring at this 38-year-old woman, whose quiet dignity masked a fear so profound it threatened to consume not just her but the 3 American-born children sitting beside her. "My children are Americans, but I am not here," Elena had said, in carefully practiced English, each word chosen with the precision of someone who understood that the wrong phrase could destroy everything she had built over 15 years in this country. "Every day I wake up afraid that today will be the day they take me away from my babies." The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable pause between game show questions. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet that settles when everyone in a room suddenly understands they're witnessing something that transcends entertainment. Something that forces them to confront the human cost of policies they might never have considered in personal terms. Steve looked at Elena's children, 16-year-old Sophia, 13-year-old Miguel, and 9-year-old Isabella, 3 young Americans whose greatest fear wasn't monsters under the bed or failing a test, but coming home from school to find their mother gone forever. And in that moment, Steve Harvey understood that some stories matter more than any game, any prize, any show business consideration could ever address. Let me take you back to how we arrived at this moment. How what started as a routine Family Feud taping became a masterclass in courage, survival, and what it means to love your children enough to live in constant fear so they can live in freedom. It was a warm October afternoon at the Steve Harvey Studios in Atlanta. The autumn sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting golden light across a studio filled with the usual energy of competing families and enthusiastic audiences. But sitting in the front row was a family whose presence represented something much more complex than game show excitement. Elena Morales sat with perfect posture between her 3 children, her hands folded carefully in her lap, every gesture controlled and measured. At 38, Elena carried herself with the dignity of someone who had learned to make herself small, in a world that often seemed designed to notice her only when it wanted her gone. She wore a simple blue dress that she had pressed carefully that morning, understanding instinctively that how she appeared might matter in ways she couldn't predict. The Morales family's journey to that studio had begun 15 years earlier, when Elena, then 23 and 8 months pregnant with Sophia, had made the desperate decision to cross the Rio Grande in the middle of the night. She wasn't seeking the American dream in any romantic sense. She was fleeing a nightmare in Guadalajara, where her husband's murder by cartel members had made her a target as well. Elena had arrived in Georgia with nothing but the clothes on her back and a determination to give her unborn child a life free from the violence that had claimed her husband. Sophia had been born 3 weeks later in a hospital in Atlanta, making her an American citizen from her first breath. Miguel and Isabella had followed, both born on American soil, both citizens of the only country they had ever known. For 15 years, Elena had built a life in the shadows. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning office buildings at night and caring for elderly residents at a nursing home during the day, sending money to support her mother back in Mexico, while raising 3 children who spoke English better than Spanish, who pledged allegiance to the American flag every morning at school, who had never known any home but Georgia. Elena had never applied for legal status, partly because she didn't understand the complex immigration system, partly because she was terrified that bringing attention to herself might result in immediate deportation. She paid taxes using an individual taxpayer identification number, contributed to Social Security she would never be able to claim, and lived with the constant awareness that a routine traffic stop could separate her forever from her American children. The Family Feud opportunity had come through Sophia's high school, which had been selected for a special community episode. Elena had initially refused to participate, terrified of appearing on television, of being visible in any way that might draw attention from immigration authorities. But her children had pleaded with her, and Elena, who had spent 15 years denying herself anything that might bring joy or recognition, had finally agreed to give her children this one experience of normalcy.